For our session tonight, we are blessed to have another returning speaker. He is a follower of Christ. He serves as a pastor in Cubao Reformed Baptist Church and a faculty member at Grace Ministerial Academy. He maintains a personal blog at bapman1689.wordpress.com and creates content for Iniscuela, an educational YouTube channel. He loves theology, culture, philosophy, history, Batman, movies, and coffee. He is happily married to Sarah. To speak on tonight's topic, intentionality of a productive life, here is Pastor Joseph Mangahas.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is a continuation of the series entitled Christian Productivity, and we are now on the second part. But for those who were not able to attend the last Tuesday, this can be taken as a standalone session. So the topic is intentional living. So you may be familiar that among the more memorable characters of Greek mythology was a king by the name of Sisyphus, and he is popular for the specific punishment that was given to him by Hades, the god of the underworld, for cheating death twice. He was punished by being given a task of rolling an immense boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down before it approaches the very peak of that hill. And so after it rolls back down, the boulder rolls back down, Sisyphus would again begin his work back at the very beginning, and that repeats for all eternity. And we may say that it is a punishment indeed. And in the modern world, it has become something that signifies the futility of the workload of modern man, that is, while laborious and requiring hard toil, nevertheless it appears to be pointless and without meaning and purpose. So apparently for many people, they do not equate labor with productivity. They do not equate even hard work with productivity. If there is no purpose, if there is no meaning in one's work, it seems that productivity is still lacking. And I think that is what I hope to touch in our discussion this evening, called intentional living, which is under the pursuit of Christian productivity. But just by way of a review, let us be reminded of the proposal that I gave in our previous session, and that is disciplined productivity is an expected Christian pursuit, meaning this is not something that is relegated to the secular and is the province of the secular gurus. That is not the case. I believe that this is a matter of Christian sanctification, and as such, the approach that I have suggested on dealing with this topic is that we must first deal with it in a way that is biblically rooted, and that means scripture is the foundation for our productivity. I have expounded a little on Psalm 1, the gateway to the Psalms, where the statement of the psalmist is that the life of the godly is one that is lived out in meditation, daily, continuous meditation of the law of God. And as a result of such kind of life, the godly is one who has been as comparable to a tree that has been planted on a streams of water, and therefore it bears its fruits in its its season. Scripture is the foundation for our productivity. However, we are not going to dismiss the common grace wisdom that can help us to become more productive, and so we want to be broadly informed. And under the biblical foundations, I have argued last Tuesday that man is created for productivity, and we have drawn from the narratives of the creation account. And then secondly, a Christian is redeemed for productivity. And I have uh, given as my launching pad the terminology of the New Testament, the term good works, and what it entails to what it how it relates to our purpose as believers, as Christians. Now, the concern that I want to deal with this evening is this: having learned that God intends that we should be productive for the good of other people and for the glory of God, how should we then set ourselves towards such an endeavor? So we are now on the more practical side of our discussion, and the proposal that I want to make for this evening is that the general duty of Christian productivity must be translated to deliberate intentional practice. So we cannot keep our intentions vague. We must translate our desire to become productive into a deliberate, intentional practice. And one mechanism that I suggest that we do that is by using clearly stated aims and spheres of our productive labor. So we must have clearly stated aims. What is our purpose, or what are our purposes for our productive pursuits? And then the spheres. What are the localities of responsibilities upon which we must give ourselves? You see, unfruitfulness is not usually a result of a deliberate intention to become disobedient to God's call to become productive. That is not often the case. Most often, the reason why many people, even Christians, become uh, unfruitful is because of their vague intentions. They do not translate their desire to become productive into actionable intentions. And therefore, the key practice or the key activity that I suggest is for us to craft a clear, gospel-driven, Bible-rooted personal statements on productivity. You see, such practice is generally regarded as worthless today. So you know perhaps of organizations, even Christian organizations sometimes, that have this statement of mission and vision that are irrelevant in their day-to-day operations. So because of that, this kind of mission vision statements is regarded as worthless, and therefore many productivity ideas have shifted the emphasis to the house of productivity, HOW, house, instead of the whys. So paano instead of bakit. And there is a problem in that approach. And to communicate what the problem to that approach is, let me use the words of D.L. Moody. He said, "Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding at something that doesn't really matter." It is true that we may improve in efficiency and therefore we become successful in what we do. But if the aim that we have set ourselves to do is something that is not truly meaningful, and purposeful, then that still amounts to failure, and perhaps a more tragic kind. So efficiency does not equate to productivity. And that is why we must have a clearly deliberated aims and uh, intentions if we are going to pursue the productive life. In order um, to enforce that proposal, let me give you two reasons why I think it is important for us to have clearly defined productivity. And the first benefit to that is that having such aids in evaluating and improving the effectiveness of our productive labor. So if we know what we are aiming for, if we know what we hope to achieve, then we can evaluate and also improve based on our evaluation the effectiveness of our productive labor. You see, many people may want to become vague in their aims and their purpose, why they are doing what they do, because they do not really want to know when they fail. But that is in fact the very condition that would lead them to such a failure. So it is better to know what we are aiming for, what we are hoping to achieve, than not knowing even when we fail. So that is the first reason why I believe it is important. Another is that it aids in evaluating to prioritize and filter incoming demands to our productive labor. You see, we are in a time of where people think that they are very efficient, and yet with their increased efficiency, perhaps with the assistance of our technological tools, the demand to our attention and time has also doubled, if not more. And therefore, we need to know what we are hoping to achieve so that we do not get swayed by the demands that are placed upon us, perhaps by other people, so that we may be productive in what truly matters. And we can only achieve that when we have clearly defined aims for our productivity. The Apostle Paul had something of that in 1 Corinthians 1 verse 17. For example, the Apostle Paul knew that his purpose was preaching the gospel, and therefore it helped him to kind of filter the things that are of secondary importance. He did not give himself to uh, be preoccupied with baptism, although he is not saying that he does not do baptism, but that as of primary importance, his sphere of productivity is of preaching the gospel. So we need something of that deliberation and intention if we are going to be able to filter the demands that are coming to us. So this principle is stated in a good secular book written by Greg McKeown called Essentialism. He said, in the same way that our closets get cluttered as clothes we never wear accumulate, so do our lives get cluttered as well-intended commitments and activities we've said yes to pile up. Most of these efforts didn't come with an expiration date. So some of you may have that experience of a wardrobe that is filled with a lot of clothes that you have never worn for perhaps a few months already, or even years, and it is simply there because it has always been there. Perhaps our inboxes, our schedule is littered with such commitments that were not really deliberated, but it came to us and we've said yes, and they do not come with an expiration date. Another coming from a more a Christian author, Tim Challies, in his book Do More Better, he said, "Your primary pursuit in productivity is not doing more things, but doing more good. It is far better to dedicate lots of attention to those areas in which you are particularly talented or gifted than it is to dedicate minimal attention to the many areas you are not. Only once you give yourself permission to stop trying to do it all, to stop saying yes to everyone, can you make your highest contribution towards the things that really matter." So you need to examine what is it that drives you. You need to examine what are the gifts and talents that has been given to you by God. And if you have deliberated the sphere of your productivity, then it helps you to filter out those things that are being given to you as a demand, but something that you are not really the most gifted person to do, and you are and perhaps your contribution is not most fitted to do. So that is so those are the reasons why I believe it is important to have clearly defined productivity. So now let us consider the components of intentional living, and let me give you three. The first is an overarching mission. So you need to have an overarching mission, and the idea behind this is that you must have a clear uniting aim or end, to use the old English word, in all that you do in life. So we must have something that is of the highest purpose, of the highest aim, through which we work. This is from James K.A. Smith. He said, "To be human is to be for something, directed towards something, oriented towards something. To be human is to be on the move, pursuing something, after something. We are dynamic creatures directed towards some end." So we are purposeful creatures. When we work, we desire that our work is actually leading to something, and perhaps something that is of true value, of highest value, and therefore we need to set that very clearly before our eyes. And a way to do that, I believe, is to have a clear stated aim of what we are here for, of what we are about. Now, just to take a note, I believe that even secular productivity gurus would acknowledge the great importance of such clearly deliberated aim. However, those secular gurus would often advise that we search for that purpose within ourselves. So we look into our hearts, and then we make the purpose of our life based on what we have found on our own hearts. But that is, of course, insufficient and incompatible with Christianity, because we know that the heart is deceitful, as we have it in scriptures, and therefore we reject that. But for us as believers, we have a very clear end given to us in the pages of the Holy Scriptures. And I believe that the best summary of that is found in the Westminster Shorter Catechism, question number 1. Many of us are familiar with this. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So this is our ultimate end. This is what should unite all our productive endeavors. This is what we are here for as believers, that in our productivity, in all of the spheres of our fruitfulness, it must be directed to the glory of God. So the overarching purpose or motive in all that we do must be the glory of God. And this is especially true in our productive doing for the good of others. The Apostle Paul said that this is the motivation for everything that we do in life, even the most menial of tasks in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. And so as believers, uh, this is the given aim for our lives, and therefore the given aim for our productive pursuits, that in everything that we do it for the glory of God. So by way of suggesting an actionable item, I think it would be helpful, and I have done this many years ago, and I still visit what I have written quite regularly. I try to visit it every week in order to remind myself of the purpose of all that I do. So as by way of an actionable item, you can draft a personal statement of your life's overall mission, and you can do that by capturing the biblical purpose of man, however, appropriating it for yourself. So make it personal. So it must be the aim that God has given for us as believers, and that is the aim of the glory of God. However, you can write something that would immediately appeal to you, knowing the kind of person that God has designed you to be. The Apostle Paul have many of such statements in his letters, and perhaps the most forceful is in Philippians chapter 1 verse 21, when he said, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." So for the Apostle Paul, living is synonymous with Christ. So the purpose of his life is Christ, and therefore even death is is gain to him. So that is the actionable item that you can do, taking from this principle. Try to draft a personal statement of your aim in life. It must be consistent to this chief end of man that we have been given in the pages of the scriptures, and yet personally appropriated using your own words and language. And uh, that is the first thing. John Piper, in his influential book "Don't Waste Your Life," uh, uh, advised something similar. He said, "Whatever you do, find the God-centered, Christ-exalting, Bible-saturated passion of your life, and find a way to say it, and live for it, and die for it, and you will make a difference that lasts. You will not waste your life." So look for that in your own life, and find a way to say it. And of course, that is not where it ends. You need to live for it, and you need to die for it. So that is the first thing, an overarching mission. The second is, of course, the particular life roles, the roles that God has assigned to us. And the idea behind this is that we must have clearly enumerated spheres of responsibilities that has been assigned to us. So what are those roles that God has given to us? Those are the spheres where we must be productive to the glory of God. So the first one, the overarching mission, relates to what unites everything, and yet you must particularize that by enumerating the roles that God has given to you. This is somewhat related to the doctrine of vocation. Again, from Tim Challies, he said, each of us has areas for which we are responsible before God. Such responsibilities can be overwhelming if we do not corral them and bring them to order. So that is what we want to do. We do not want those spheres of responsibilities just weighing on us vaguely. We want to clearly enumerate it in order that we may become more effective in assessing which areas we are neglecting and which areas we are perhaps doing quite well, and yet we can still improve a little bit more. We can enumerate those life roles. Also, Matt Perman, another Christian author, stated, talking about roles puts us right at the heart of the Christian vocation. The Bible teaches that our roles are not just areas of responsibilities, but callings. Our roles are each callings given to us by God, and through which we serve God and others. So this is the flesh and blood of our productivity. This is where we live out the grand purpose of our life in the day-to-day responsibilities that God is giving to us, and this is a perfectly biblical approach. You have the parable of the talents, for example, in Matthew 25 verses 14 to 30, and the lesson of the parable of the talents, which I hope you are familiar with, is that we shall give an account for all that was entrusted to our care, and therefore we better make sure that we are giving ourselves uh, to uh, to those things that God has entrusted to us. And then in the many portions of the New Testament, you would note that Christian imperatives are not given to us in as an abstract universal code, but oftentimes these are given to men and women in their specific roles of life. So you have, for example, Ephesians 6 verse 2 to 20. We are not going to read the whole of this passage, but you would find the Apostle Paul giving a set of exhortation to parents, to fathers, to husbands, to wives, to employees, to employers or masters and slaves in that during that time. So the idea behind this is that there is a way to become faithful as a believer and to become productive even as believers in our particular spheres of responsibilities. So you have many passages in relation to that. Colossians 3 verse 18 to 4 verse 6, and then also in Titus 2 verses 1 to 10. So again, let me give you an actionable item here. You can list each of the present roles that you feel, and perhaps you can draft a clear aim for each of these roles. Again, biblically rooted, but personally appropriated. So it helps just to see this in a clear enumeration. Perhaps you can add to that your personal spirituality, your individual calling as a believer, with all the responsibilities that it entail in terms of your personal communion with God, your personal sanctification, and or perhaps you are a husband, you are a student, you are a wife, you are a church member, you are a businessman. So you can enumerate these life roles that God has stationed you in, and by doing so, you can think more clearly about what is expected of you by God to become faithful and fruitful in these specific life roles. So again, the first one is the overarching mission. The second is particular life roles. Lastly, uh, uh, a holy ambition. Now, what do I mean by holy ambition? Well, this is a special, grand, God glorifying aspiration that does good to other people, for which you can strive towards achieving. I am indebted to John Piper in this idea, but this is taken from the Apostle Paul in Romans 15 verse 20, when he said, "And thus I make it my ambition to preach the gospel not where Christ has already been named, lest I build on someone else's foundation." So the Apostle Paul is quite deliberate. He makes it his ambition to preach the gospel where Christ has not yet where Christ has not been preached yet. Many people would say Christians should not be ambitious, and that is not biblically accurate. Because of that, in many churches, there is an aversion to thinking big. It is often considered as arrogance. Of course, the biblical balance is that we must not despise the small things, as we have it in Zechariah 4 verse 10. We should be faithful even in the most humble and the most menial task that God has given to us. However, we must also, in expectation of great things from God, attempt great things for God. So I have used the words of the missionary William Carey when he preached in a gathering for missions. He said, expect great things from God, attempt great things for uh, God. In Jeremiah 32 verse 27, there is a statement by the Lord saying, "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too hard for me?" So it is our faith in our big and mighty God that uh, that emboldens us to attempt things that are also grand, perhaps for the good of other people and for the glory of God. Again, from Matt Perman, he said, "God never intended true humility to be a fabric softener for our aspirations. We are not to be ambitious for our own honor or glory, but we are to be ambitious for God's honor and glory, radically so. Dreaming and doing things for God is the evidence, effects, and the expectation of genuine faith." Perhaps as an actionable item, you can seek in prayer and thoughtful observation a need that you may carry for yourself as your own personal burden. Maybe you already have something of that uh, nature. There is something in the world that you find that needs to be addressed, and there is something in your own set of gifts and situatedness that can contribute to that, then make it a kind of a holy ambition that you can do for the good of other people and for the glory of God. Perhaps a good example of this was the man that became instrumental for the civil rights of the minority during the, I believe, in the 60s, the civil rights movement. And I'm not endorsing the whole of his theology and his approach, but it is undeniable that he was an impact for good for many people, and that is Martin Luther King Jr. And you may remember the great speech that he gave during one of their rallies. I have a dream, and it was that dream of seeing a more racially equal America. And to some degree and to some extent, this has been achieved as a result of his dream, as a result of his ambition. So we can perhaps set ourselves to such aim that is dear and close to us, and perhaps somewhere where we had been providentially situated by God. So so these are the three components of what I believe is intentional living: the overarching mission, particular life roles, and a holy ambition. In during the Great Awakening, one man who has become mightily useful in the hands of God for the conversion of countless of souls was Jonathan Edwards. And the reading that I can suggest to you are his resolutions, but the specific resolutions that are relevant to our discussion are his resolutions number 1 to 4. Let me read specifically resolution number 4. He said, "Resolve never to do any manner of thing, whether in soul or body, less or more, but what tends to the glory of God, nor suffer it if I can avoid it." So you find the principle of a clearly stated aim that he is for the glory of God. That is what he is for, to live for the glory of God and for the good of men. And that filter enables him to eliminate other things that do not serve the purpose of glorifying God. And it is for such resolutions, by the grace of God, that that we have a man like Jonathan Edwards, a sinner but one who has achieved a life a life of a great degree of godliness for the glory of God, as well as usefulness. So that is a good example for us. Again, from Matt Perman, Edwards shows us that a life well lived doesn't just happen. It requires intentionality, and intentionality manifests itself in certain mechanisms that help us maintain our intentionality. Edwards' resolutions are one example of such a mechanism. So these are the mechanisms that we can use: writing clearly deliberated aims and enumeration of our life roles, as well as having a clearly uh, uh, deliberated ambition. These are mechanisms that we can use in order to become more intentional in our in our productivity. So God is glorified in service that is done faithfully and excellently, and that is something that does not happen when we are vague in our intentions. It happens through discipline and intentionality. So that ends the second part of Christian productivity.
Thank you very much, Pastor Joseph, for your talk. So we'll now move on to our Q&A portion, but just a few reminders first. Please keep your questions short and to the point so that we can have more time for many as possible. Please avoid asking questions regarding very specific cases that might involve sharing private information. For live questions, please use Zoom's raise hand function to be acknowledged by the moderator, or send them through the Zoom chat or privately to our RCM Zoom host, Sister Eliza, or to Mrs. Dara. Those joining via FB Live may send their questions in the comment section, or you may also send a private message to the RCM FB page. So, Pastor Joseph, we have a question here. If one feels that their current occupation or job is the type of productivity that does not matter, would this justify resigning or leaving that occupation or job, even if they do not have a clear plan of what to do next?
Perhaps it would not be wise to just leave a job when there is no plan yet. So I think that seeking a greater degree of usefulness is admirable and ideal. However, it must be done with plan rather than in carelessness. So remember, especially when there are people who are depending on you, you may not have a very useful task, useful vocation yet in terms of your professional career. But if you are doing that as a job that gains an income, and that income is supporting perhaps your other responsibilities, like if you have a family, so that is still serving a purpose. And yet, but as I've said, it is ideal to seek out greater degrees of usefulness if we find that what we are presently doing is something that is not fulfilling such an ideal.
Thank you, Pastor Joseph. I think this is a question also ng marami, no? Lalo na pag parang di na sila nakakakita ng growth or joy sa current position nila. But as you advised, we also need to consider practical matters then when thinking about decisions if you're going to leave your job or not. So thank you for that, Pastor Joseph. We have another question here. Having clearly defined goals of productivity may also appear to be for adults concern or practice. How can we encourage young people to emulate Jonathan Edwards, develop this habit of developing clearly defined productivity goals early in their lives?
I think the actionable advice to that question, how can we help young people to emulate Jonathan Edwards, because we used him as an example. An actionable advice would be to read about his life. So I could recommend his biography written by Ian Murray, entitled Jonathan Edwards. And if you haven't yet, it is not a very long reading. You can read it in one sitting. You can read his resolutions, which has, I think, above 70 items. So you can emulate Jonathan Edwards if you know more about him, and my suggestion is to read about him.
All right, thank you, Pastor Joseph. We have another forwarded question here. So, given that ambition is indeed biblical, what could be practical guidelines or wisdom for a Christian who, with sober assessment of gifts and talents, desires something of an executive position in a corporation?
So that is uh, uh, difficult to answer, but um, for myself, I don't think that I would be that specific in terms of the position. I would focus more on the good that I hope to achieve. So, for example, what do you want to achieve as an execute, as let's say a CEO of a specific organization? You can focus more on the good that you want to achieve rather than the position, so that even if you do not attain to that position, and yet still manage to contribute to the good that you desire to contribute to, it would not be a failure but still a success. So I think for myself, I would not focus on positions and specific jobs, etc. I would focus more on the essence, the substance of what I hope to contribute to the world for the glory of God.
All right, thank you, Pastor Joseph. So here's another forwarded question. Regarding the current topic, Pastor, what's your view about the phrase or sentence, make your passion your profession?
I think passion is important, but I don't think that passion is the most important factor. So there are responsibilities that God may give to us, about which we may not always be passionate about, and yet we had been providentially placed in those situations. So in those instances, obedience trumps passion. But I do not dismiss the role of passion. I think it is also important to be passionate in what you are doing. I just don't think that it is what can ultimately sustain a productive living.
All right, thank you, Pastor. So we encourage the listeners to send more questions, and you may also send your thoughts either through Zoom or through Zoom chat. So, Pastor, we have another question here. Is it more glorifying for God when a student prioritizes his or her progress in understanding the Bible over his or her studies?
I don't think that these two should be opposed and in rivalry against each other. Of course, for Christians, the highest priority in terms of learning is to learn the Word of God. It should not be in competition with the other learnings. Uh, so we must give time to both, and it must not be framed as if one is competing against the other.
Pastor, related to this question, but in a different manner naman or parang different focus, because there are students that who seem to prioritize extracurricular activities over their actual studies. So how would you advise, or what advice can you give if students are struggling to prioritize more of their other stuff, like for example, org stuff, kaysa yung studies nila? Kasi I think this is a struggle for many, especially pag mga orgs meron din talagang maraming tasks eh. So what would you advise those students who are struggling to balance between their extracurricular and their academic studies?
Um, uh, to answer on my feet, I think it is a poor case of deliberation. Definitely, when you entered the life of a student, you are planning to graduate and perhaps to graduate as excellently as you can manage. And if extracurricular activities are becoming a rival to that aim, then there may be a problem in deliberation. So to relate it to our topic, you need to have a clearly stated aim of what you hope to achieve as a student. So is it to excel in extracurricular activities at the expense of what you hope to master, which is your course supposedly. So I think it can be helped by becoming more deliberate in your purpose as a student.
Thank you, Pastor. So we have a few more questions for tonight, no? So this next one, do you think the Bible presents a hierarchy among the spheres or roles of life? For example, a man may be a husband, father, worker, or even a pastor all at the same time. These roles may compete all at the same time. What is the biblical way to examine this and balance the responsibilities?
Yeah, so that is a good question, and I think I will answer in the affirmative. Definitely, there are spheres of calling that are more significant and more important than that of the others. So there must be prioritizing. So, for example, a pastor's a pastor may come to neglect his own family, and justify that by saying that I am focusing on the ministry, and that is not proper, because his primary responsibility is to be his own family first, before he can manage the household of God. So there must be prioritizing, and that prioritizing must take into the account the which responsibilities and life roles are more significant, and calls for more of our attention over against the other.
Okay, so actually a follow-up to that po, no? How would we answer those who believe that ministerial roles are more important to God? Therefore, it is okay not to perform well in our roles at home. Therefore, should not be considered an issue.
So I think the statement of the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 3 is already sufficient to answer that. How can he manage the household of God if he is not able to manage his own household well? So the Apostle Paul definitely finds it an imperative for ministers to become faithful stewards of their own households if they are to be effective in managing the church and their own ministry. So one comes before the other in terms of responsibility.
Okay, Pastor, thank you po for answering all the questions. I think that's the last one that we have for tonight. So we'd like to thank you again for your talk. So Pastor Joseph shared with us the importance of clearly defined productivity and the components of intentional productivity. He also gave us actionable items on how we can make productivity intentional. But at the end of the day, our goals in life and our productivity must be for the glory of God alone.